always been an overachiever. And I don't say that like it's a badge of honor, although there were years where it might have sounded like one to me. But mostly I say it with a kind of tired affection for the version of me who always needed to do a little bit more, who needed to get it just right, who thought that being enough meant producing more, offering more, giving more, constantly proving myself worthy by doing just a bit better, a bit faster, a bit more perfectly. And recently my therapist was talking to me about perfectionism, and she said something about how it can get in the way of presence, how perfectionism convinces us that there's some ideal version of ourselves that we are supposed to be, instead of allowing us to live the life we're actually in. And I nodded very sagely, like I was agreeing. And I said, oh, of course. I don't want to be a perfectionist. I just want to be perfect. Because in my mind, it's not perfectionism if I can actually do it. If I can be the best, be productive, be useful, if I can manage my life and everyone else's, if I can run fast enough and far enough and get everything right, well, that's not a problem, that's the goal. But of course, that's not how it works. Not for me, and I don't think for most of us. Because at a certain point, your body will call your bluff. The spirit will say, no more. You might be able to outrun your exhaustion for a while, but not forever. And it took me a long time to realize that rest isn't the opposite of work. It's not what you do after you're finished being useful. Rest isn't a reward that you earn. It's a rhythm we're made for. My friend recently told me about an idea from Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, author of the book Sacred Rest. And in it, she offers this simple but profound idea that rest isn't just one thing. She says there are actually 7 different kinds of rest that people need. It's more complicated than just get 8 hours and you're fine. Because how many of us have gotten enough sleep and still felt bone tired, or taken a day off and come back frayed around the edges? So of course there's physical rest, sleep and naps and lying down without also trying to answer emails from your phone. And there's mental rest, a break from the swirl of thoughts, the to-do lists running on loop, the voice in your head that doesn't just stop because you close your eyes. But there's also sensory rest, quiet in the midst of the bustling New York City streets, maybe some dimmed lights, cell phones turned off, no children grabbing at your legs. And social rest, which doesn't necessarily mean being alone, although it can, but also being with people who let you be your full self, without needing to explain or perform or work to be understood. And similarly, emotional rest, where you can let go and trust that you'll still be loved. A rest where you don't have to hold it all. And then there's creative rest, a moment to remember that you are more than just a producer of things, that you get to take in beauty too, to look at the sky or listen to music, or let something small and lovely take your breath away. And finally, there's spiritual rest, the capacity to experience something sacred in the world. to be reminded that you are a part of something greater than yourself. That's the kind that reminds me that I don't have to hold everything, that I can rest not just my body, but my soul. So where do you feel the deficit? Which one are you longing for the most? Because most of us aren't missing all 7 at once, although in certain seasons I know I have. But usually there's 1 or 2 places where we're running on empty, and it's not always the one you think. So last summer, right before I joined community church, I spent 10 weeks as a chaplain intern at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And if you have been through clinical pastoral education or know somebody who has, you might be familiar with the intensity of that experience. Basically, it's 10 weeks of deep immersion in hospital life, of walking into rooms where people are grieving or recovering or holding on by a thread, and trying to be a calm, compassionate presence in the midst of it all. So half of my time that summer was on a cardiac unit with patients recovering from or preparing for heart surgery. And the other half was in the cardiac NICU, the newborn neonatal intensive care unit, where I visited infants and their families, most of whom were navigating long and uncertain medical journeys. And it was beautiful work. And you can imagine it was also really exhausting. So every day I would walk into the hospital up at 168th, already bracing myself, not knowing what I would encounter, not knowing who I would talk to or how it would affect me. And every day, pretty much every day, in between rounds, I would make my way up to the chaplain's office, up to a little couch on the 3rd floor, and fall asleep. And I didn't even mean to nap most of the time. It just happened. My body would hit the cushions and shut down. It was like all the emotions I'd been holding, not just mine, but everyone else's, finally had space to land, and my body couldn't do anything but rest. But even though I was actually listening to what I needed, I felt so guilty. I worried I was being lazy, that I wasn't doing enough, that I should be working harder, visiting more patients, journaling about my theology instead of closing my eyes. I kept thinking, everybody else is working right now, and I'm napping on the job. And then at the very end of the program, as we celebrated the completion of our unit, our supervisor told us that he had calculated our visitation numbers, how many people we had spoken to over our time in the hospital. And in our cohort of 8, we made 1,381 visits. And he didn't tell us individually how many we had made, but I was certain I hadn't made nearly the amount of anyone else in the group. Never mind that I had meaningful conversations that summer with grieving parents and frightened teens and frustrated elders. I felt ashamed and embarrassed that I hadn't done more when I had the chance. But then the supervisor pulled me aside and told me my individual stats. I had visited 176 patients over the summer, and I won't make you do the math, I already did it. It's just barely, almost exactly, the average number of visits for our group. So all of that guilt, all of that worry that I hadn't done enough, all that shame about taking some naps, it hadn't meant that I wasn't doing my job. It just meant that I was doing it in a way that made space for me. my limits, my body, my spirit. I had found my rhythm, not someone else's, but mine. Because rest is part of the work. It's part of the life of the Spirit. When we rest, not just sleep, but truly rest in all of the ways that we need, we are saying that we are more than we produce. That our worth is not measured by output or perfection. That we all belong even when we pause. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Not earned worth, not conditional worth, inherent, meaning it's already there, meaning you don't have to prove it. So if that's true, if that's really true and we really believe that, then rest is not a failure. Rest is a spiritual affirmation of our belovedness. Those naps I took on the chaplain's couch, they weren't indulgent, they were holy. Those moments of quiet weren't laziness, they were sacred space. When you listen to your body, when you lay down the burden of trying to be everything, you can make room for the sacred to enter. Now, I don't always remember that. I still fall into old patterns, but the more that I practice rest, not just sleep, but creative rest, emotional rest, spiritual rest, the more I remember who I really am. Not just a minister, not just a helper, but a person, a soul, a body, a beloved child of the universe. And sometimes rest isn't just about a nap or a quiet moment. Sometimes what we're really longing for is a different way of being. And that summer in the hospital taught me that I couldn't just push through forever, that something had to give. And what gave eventually was the illusion that I had to prove myself to be worthy of care. And letting go of that belief didn't happen overnight, and it didn't come easily. But there's a kind of freedom that opens up when you stop trying to prove that you can do it all and start asking what it might look like to live differently. Not all or nothing, not burned out or checked out, but something else. A path not of perfection, but of presence. A path that reminds you you don't have to swing between extremes to find something meaningful. Our wisdom story today told the story of Buddha's journey to find the middle way. And raised in a life of luxury, when the Buddha encountered pain and suffering for the first time, he realized that everything he thought was true was just part of the story. And at first he rejected all of the riches he had known and lived a life of asceticism, denying himself even basic needs like enough food or enough sleep. But as he grew weaker, he realized that depriving himself also hadn't helped end anyone else's suffering. And so he discovered the middle way, a place between too much pleasure or too much pain, where instead of focusing on giving or taking something from himself, he could finally focus on others. And this story is one that I've heard, and maybe some of you have heard before. But still, every time I hear it, something new rises up for me. Because it's so easy to feel like we're supposed to go all in all the time, to be always available, to be always informed, to be working as hard as we can, loving as deeply as we can, showing up at every protest, replying to every message, making ourselves endlessly useful to the world. Or when that gets too heavy, to flip the switch and unplug entirely, to check out, to numb, to say, I'm done, and try to disappear from the responsibilities of being human. And really, there's nothing wrong with either of those impulses. There are moments when both are valid. But I've noticed that neither one feels sustainable. Not for me and not for most of the people I know. What I crave, and what I think so many of us are seeking, is a life that honors the full range of who we are, our energy and our exhaustion, our passion and our need to pull back, our joy and our sorrow, and all of the spaces in between. What I want is to live in a way that doesn't flatten or deny the richness of my experience, but also doesn't demand that I burn out trying to be everything to everyone. When I was growing up, my mom always used to use the phrase, everything in moderation. But really, the entire phrase is everything in moderation, including moderation. And that's really what I think the middle way is about. It's not about finding that perfect balance between two extremes, because I don't think that exists, but letting go of the belief that you're supposed to live in someone else's version of a balanced life. It's about learning to live in your own rhythm. It's about figuring out what helps you stay connected to yourself, to others, to whatever feels holy. And so I wonder, what does your middle way look like? Where are the places you find yourself pulled to extremes? What are the habits or the beliefs that no longer serve you? What are the things you've been denying yourself or pushing yourself toward without asking whether they still fit? What would it look like to let go of one small thing this week, just one, and see what that creates space for? Maybe you're not able to go to the gym 5 days a week, but could you take a walk just because it feels good to move? Maybe a full meditation practice isn't possible right now, but could you sit for one quiet minute in the morning before the world rushes in? Maybe you can't silence your phone all day, but could you eat one meal without it? Just you and your food and your breath. A better life doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be hard. You just have to notice, to begin again, and to keep going. We will all fall out of balance sometimes. That's just a part of being alive. We will all lose track of what we need. We will all forget what we have learned. We will all hurt each other and miss each other and feel like we're not doing enough. But the invitation, the beautiful, lifelong invitation, is to come back, to return to yourself, to community, to this community, to return to the path, not perfectly but honestly, not quickly but kindly. And when we do that, when we all do that, when we begin again, not in shame, but in love, We create the kind of world we want to live in. A world where grace is possible. A world where balance for each of us is possible. A world where we are not measured by how hard we push, but by how deeply we pay attention. So, beloveds, may you listen. May you rest. May you find your way not once, but again and again. And may you keep returning every day to the middle way that is yours to travel. Amen.